And what we had done, Lieutenant, was to establish definitely, for the first time, through careful experiments, that man at present is using only a fraction of his brain capacity, especially in the field of awareness, and that certain drugs are powerful devices for expanding this awareness toward its real possibilities.
Brother and sister, together we'll make it through. Oh, yeah. Someday a spirit will take you and guide you there. And I'll be there just helping you out whenever I can. Everybody's free. Everybody's free. Oh, yeah. Oh, to feel good.
The successfully marketed serotonin antidepressants, which came into consumer use in the 1980s, were sold as mechanical fix-its. In the marketer's dream, the complex system of self and environment was distilled into a pill to be cheerfully swallowed on a daily basis, offering the promise that you would return to the persona of a productive and contented citizen.
This idea that we can somehow medicate ourselves into a state of happiness. This encourages drug dependence, and it encourages people to not really examine the foundations of the problem that make them feel bad in the first place, because you can simply mask the symptoms.
It's not like any individual is wrong to do that. It's the picture that's wrong. The individuals are suffering, clearly. We have to have compassion for people looking for solutions to their personal problems in whatever way they can. But it doesn't seem that medicines that dampen your desires and dampen your identity and dampen your caring about this world are good medicines for the individual or for the planet.
Overburdened by their HMO schedules, doctors no longer have the time to work through serious issues with their patients. Their only recourse is to issue a quick prescription.
That's one of the problems why it's difficult for drugs like LSD or the other psychedelics to be integrated into the medical model. It's an experience. A therapist has to actually sit down with the person and talk with them.
Depression and other types of mental illnesses are understood to be chemical imbalances in the brain. It's very rare that when an SSRI is prescribed, that actually measurements are taken to establish that there are chemical imbalances.
I don't think that chemistry explains depression. So the idea that depression can be related simply to some biochemical changes I think it's a very inadequate theory. Beneath depression are basically traumatic experiences. From our perspective, that's a symptom that we have seen most frequently changed very profoundly. We have seen people coming out of deep depression lasting several years, sometimes after one session.
The companies are not interested to hear about a treatment that may need just to be given once or twice that could make a huge difference to people.
As far as the dominating culture, the pharmaceutical, industrial, government complex, it's not that they don't want you to be on drugs. They want you to be on drugs. They just want you to be on corporate drugs.
But what about the pharmaceutical companies? Couldn't they make a lot of money by turning all these substances into pharmaceutical products?
All of these drugs are off patent. MDMA, patented in 1914, it's in the public domain. LSD, first synthesized 38, it's in the public domain. Psilocybin was first synthesized in the 50s, it's in the public domain. Marijuana as a plant, these things are in the public domain.
The corporate government approach is, if we can't patent it, let's prohibit it. All you do by banning these things preemptively is you create a black market. You create an opportunity for somebody to get very rich by dealing in, what is now a prohibited substance. And you motivate intrepid psychonauts to experiment even more.
There are many people who are using substances, all kinds of different substances, legal and illegal. Just give me something. Let's just forget who I am and what's going on. And medicine is the opposite. Let's explore who I am and let's understand it.
Psychedelics open up the door to our inner psyche, so we have human experiences under the influence of a psychedelic rather than a psychedelic experience that's somehow or other intrinsic to the drug.
A flood of findings with drug addicts and convicted felons showed that these substances could recondition behavior, enabling them to make dramatic changes in their lives. After participating in one of these experiments himself, Alcoholics Anonymous founder Bill Wilson became convinced that LSD could cure chronic alcoholism. In a series of studies conducted between 1954 and 1960, Dr. Humphrey Osmond proved him right, treating 2,000 alcoholics with LSD under carefully controlled conditions and achieving a success rate that had never been duplicated by any other means.
We've turned the corner on drug addiction in the United States. Drug addiction in the United States is under control.
First of all, the word addiction itself comes from a Latin word, addictus. And addictus was somebody who owed somebody money, couldn't pay it back, and had to become a slave to them. So addiction always implies slavery. That, of course, includes drugs, but also includes shopping, sexaholism, addiction to power, addiction to wealth, addiction to violence, addiction to work. Anything that we try and use to fill the internal void can become addictive. On top of that, of course, we live in a society that values externals. Everybody gets the message that they're not adequate, because those perceptions of not being adequate is what drive a lot of consumerism. So this society automatically and unconsciously generates insecurity in almost everybody, which of course is an alienation from the self, which of course is a source of internal distress and pain, which again leads to addictive behaviors.
The serotonergic hallucinogens in particular, they're classified as drugs of addiction, but they don't induce addictive syndromes in any way that we can measure them, either in animal models or in human models. And in fact, in a way, they're misclassified as having high addictive potential. And the reality is, when used under the right kind of constructs, they can actually be used to treat addictive spectrum disorders.
These drugs are illegal, and one remembers Professor David Nutt. I mean, it got so many headlines at the time. He was sacked by the former Home Secretary for his advice, saying that ecstasy and LSD were less harmful than alcohol. Should perhaps people view this in the context that there is someone perhaps who just generally wants less regulation of some of these drugs?
Well, this is a very specific application of the drugs. It's a medical application, and these are preliminary results. And so we're interested in the potential of the drug. So really, it doesn't directly implicate the policy issues. We're more interested in being able to research these drugs for their potential benefits.
No theory of neuroscience, no theory of the brain and how the brain is related to consciousness will ever be complete if it doesn't take these phenomena into account.
I went to London a couple of years ago where there were some psychiatrists really trying to open up, just even looking at what the old research with LSD has shown, what the old and current research on MDMA has shown, and they're just trying at that level. No one's doing any research, they're just trying to reintroduce the fact that these drugs were used, had great therapeutic results, and for some reason the whole thing was shut down and squashed.
For various complicated and misplaced reasons, these substances, which historically have always been totally sacred, at the center of the cultural evolution of man, they've been shoved in the bag of illegality.
The powers that be have held that these things should not be allowed. They're still illegal generally, not all of them, but many of them. They're held outside, not in other countries necessarily, not in every country. The countries where their traditions know that part of their innate character of their people and their relationship to the land comes through these medicines. Why would they make them illegal? They would tear the people away from their own history, from their own land, from their own sense of nature, from their own health.
Our decisions that our governments make about the applicability of these substances for the treatment of very important medical problems are not based upon scientific evidence. They're based upon a prohibitionist attitude that says these are dangerous drugs without any medical uses whatsoever, in spite of the fact that we have evidence that these substances have been used for medical purposes for tens of thousands of years. But because of government regulations, we're denying major aspects of our population access to medicines that they dearly need.
One day, if these drugs are rescheduled, of course it would have to be used in carefully controlled settings by trained and skilled people who had undergone, let's say, psychedelic psychotherapy training programs, and there had to be oversight and regulation.
If it becomes approved for medical use, that's going to involve a societal change in the medical profession, learning how to use these properly.
The future of psychedelics on the immediate front is getting them accepted into clinical use, maybe establishing centers or training clinicians who can use them in psychotherapy and having places where people can go and have these experiences, whether they have specific mental or physical problems or whether they just want to go for spiritual exploration of consciousness.
And it's possible, and I think it'd be very interesting to use them not just for disease states, but to enhance human growth, spiritual growth, and being more empathic and connected and perhaps better human beings.
If we look at our world, we are intellectually, technologically, vastly overdeveloped with very primitive emotions. And that's why the world is at risk.
That seems to be the message that one gets from psychedelics is, wake up. We're potentially the salvation of the planet and also potentially the destruction of the planet. And it may be that messenger molecules are a way to try to initiate this dialogue.
Well, I think the people who would benefit most of all are professors. And this, I think it would be extremely good for almost anybody with fixed ideas and with a great certainty about what's what, and to realize that the world he has constructed is by no means the only world, that there are these extraordinary other types of universe which we may inhabit and which we should be very grateful for inhabiting, I think.
Psychedelics, they help people become aware of the multidimensional nature of the universe and of themselves. We're talking about transformation at every level: physical, emotional, mental, spiritual.
This rediscovery of the scientific study of psychedelics is opening the door to the study of many aspects of spirit. And I think science will be much richer for it.
In order to use these medicines, you have to be rebel enough against a taboo to look at the taboo. And the whole nature of a taboo is that it's an area of culture where we're told, don't look there, it's not good to even look there.
We have no real clear idea of all the different people that have been influenced by psychedelics. Kary Mullis, who invented the polymerase chain reaction, for which he won the Nobel Prize. Steve Jobs has written in his autobiography about how LSD was one of the most important experiences of his life. Psychedelics have catalyzed in many people a creative process that has led them to make major, profound discoveries that have changed the face of the world.
There always seems to be one ingredient in the recipe of social change that our generation has tried to expunge from the record, and that's the fact that millions of us lay prostrate before the gates of awe, having taken some psychedelic substance. And critics would always say, don't take these drugs because they're going to change your life forever. What they didn't understand is that was the entire point.
I think it's unwise to be so scared of the possible risks of these drugs, which there are possible risks. There's risks in anything. I mean, there's risk in driving a car, there's risk in crossing the street. But to be so scared of them as to make them illegal and inaccessible to anyone and not even want to research them or not even want to think about them, why would we do that? Are we so sure that we can solve all the problems that confront us that we want to throw away a possible tool that can expand consciousness, that could possibly, give us some more insights and some more possibilities of how to resolve the difficulties that we're facing? I think not.
We had this conflict in the 60s when psychedelics went wrong. What I think is even deeper is when psychedelics go right, not only would these drugs have the potential to be useful in psychotherapy, they had the potential to be useful in the evolution of the human species, and that they could make a major contribution to the survival of the planet.
Eternity in an hour. It's almost impossible, of course, as all the patients say, to describe it. There are the colors and the beauties, the designs, the beautiful way things appear. People themselves, dull people that I thought dull, appear fascinating, interesting, mysterious, wonderful. But that's only the beginning. Suddenly you notice that there aren't these separations. That we're not on a separate island shouting across to somebody else and trying to hear what they're saying and misunderstanding them.